There is something you have probably noticed about certain people, a quality so subtle that you might have felt it before you were able to name it. These people walk into a room and something shifts. Not because they are the loudest, not because they are the most attractive or the most decorated or the most credentialed, but because they carry something that most people do not carry. A kind of settled, unshakable, almost gravitational sense of self that does not seem to require anything from the room in order to exist. They do not announce themselves. They do not explain themselves. They do not justify their decisions or defend their choices or offer lengthy rationales for why they did what they did or why they are who they are. They simply are. And somehow, inexplicably, powerfully, that is more than enough. You have met these people. Perhaps only once or twice in your life. Perhaps you have read about them in history. Perhaps you have watched them from a distance and felt a mixture of admiration and confusion because everything you were taught about how to earn respect, everything the world told you about the importance of communication and transparency and being understood, seems to be contradicted by their existence, because they do not do any of those things. And yet they are among the most respected, most trusted, most quietly powerful people you have ever encountered. Today I want to tell you why. I want to take you deep into the psychology and the philosophy of this quality, this refusal to explain, this deliberate, disciplined, profoundly misunderstood practice of letting your life speak while your mouth stays closed. And I want to show you that this is not arrogance. It is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is one of the most sophisticated and most ancient forms of human power ever understood. And once you truly understand it, once it moves from your head into your bones, you will never feel the compulsive need to explain yourself again. Let us begin with a question that most people never think to ask. Why do you explain yourself? Not in the practical sense. Not the times when you are sharing information that someone genuinely needs. Not the times when clarification serves a real purpose, but the other times. The times when someone questions your decision, you feel a sudden rush of anxiety and immediately begin constructing a case for why you made the choice you made. The times when someone misunderstands your intention and you feel an almost physical urgency to correct the record, to make sure they see you the way you want to be seen. The times when someone criticizes you and your first instinct is not to reflect on whether they might be right but to defend yourself, to explain why you are not what they just said you are. These moments, why do they happen? What is actually driving them? If you sit with this question honestly, if you resist the temptation to give yourself the flattering answer, you will discover something uncomfortable. The need to explain yourself is almost never really about communication. It is almost never really about helping the other person understand something important. It is almost always, at its core, about fear. Fear that if you do not explain yourself, the other person will think less of you. Fear that if you do not justify your decision, someone will conclude that it was wrong. Fear that if you do not defend yourself against criticism, the criticism will somehow become true. Fear that without your explanation, you will be misunderstood, misjudged, undervalued, dismissed. And underneath all of these specific fears lives a single deeper, more fundamental fear. The fear that you, without explanation, without justification, without the constant construction and maintenance of a narrative about who you are and why you do what you do, are not enough, that the raw, unmediated, unexplained reality of you is insufficient, that you need to add words to yourself in order to be acceptable, in order to be respected, in order to be worthy of the space you occupy in the world. And this fear, this deep and rarely examined fear, is the engine that drives most human communication. It is the reason most people talk too much, defend too readily, justify too eagerly. And it is precisely the thing that the truly powerful have learned to see through Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who governed an empire of millions while privately wrestling with his own humanity in the pages of his Meditations, wrote something that strikes at the heart of what we are discussing. He wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." And what strikes me about this is the implicit recognition that self-respect and the approval of others are often in direct conflict, that the pursuit of being understood, of being seen favorably, of managing how you are perceived, frequently comes at the cost of something more essential. your integrity, your authenticity, your relationship with yourself. When you explain yourself compulsively, when you justify and defend and rationalize endlessly, you are not just using words, you are sending a signal. A signal that says your opinion of me matters more than my opinion of myself. A signal that says I am not certain enough of my own ground to stand on it without your confirmation. A signal that says I need you to agree with me before I can fully agree with myself. And people receive this signal, not always consciously, not always explicitly, but they feel it. And it does something very specific to the way they perceive you. It diminishes you, not because your explanations are wrong or your justifications are invalid, but because the very act of offering them unsolicited reveals a dependency that commands not respect but management. People do not look up to those who need to be understood. They look up to those who are complete without being understood. Think about the people throughout history who commanded the deepest and most enduring respect. Think about figures like Marcus Aurelius himself, or Epictetus, or Seneca, or in more modern history, figures who carried themselves with that particular quality of self-possessed authority. What is consistent across all of them? They were not people who spent their energy explaining themselves to their critics. They were not people who issued lengthy defenses of their choices or their characters. They acted, they lived, they embodied their values with such consistency and such depth that the explanation became unnecessary. The life itself was the argument, the character itself was the evidence. And this is the principle at the heart of everything we are exploring today. Truly powerful people understand, at a level that goes beyond intellectual comprehension into lived reality, that actions speak not just louder than words, but in an entirely different language. A language that is more honest, more precise, and more persuasive than anything words can achieve. When you explain yourself, you are asking someone to take your word for who you are. When you live yourself, when you simply and consistently act from your deepest values without commentary or justification, you are showing them, and showing is always more powerful than telling. Epictetus taught something that is directly relevant here, and he taught it from a position of personal authority that very few philosophers can claim. As a former slave, as a man who had experienced the most extreme form of external powerlessness, he writes a philosophy of inner sovereignty that remains unmatched in its clarity and its courage. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." And the connection to our topic might not be immediately obvious, so let me make it explicit. When you compulsively explain yourself, you are essentially trying to control how external reality, specifically the external reality of other people's perceptions, unfolds. You are wishing that things which happen, meaning people's judgments and misunderstandings and criticisms, would happen differently. You are trying to intervene in a process that is fundamentally outside your control. You are spending your energy on the wrong side of the equation. Epictetus would say, the other person's perception of you is not within your power. Your own character, your own actions, your own values, these are within your power. Focus there, build there, invest there, and let the perceptions fall where they will. Not with indifference to the world, but with a clear-eyed recognition of what is and is not yours to manage. And when you truly internalize this, when you stop trying to manage the unmanageable, something remarkable happens. You are free. Free to act without the constant weight of image management. Free to make decisions without the anxiety of how they will be perceived. Free to be wrong sometimes without the devastation of being seen as wrong. Free to be misunderstood without the compulsion to correct every misunderstanding. Free, perhaps for the first time, to simply be who you are without the exhausting work of explaining what that means. Now I want to address something that will be on many minds at this point. Because there is a version of this philosophy that sounds appealing, but is actually deeply problematic. There is a version that says, I do not explain myself because I do not care what anyone thinks. And people sometimes adopt this as a kind of armor, a way of protecting themselves from the vulnerability of being judged by pretending that judgment is irrelevant to them. This is not what I am describing. This is not the silence of the powerful. This is the silence of the defended. And there is a world of difference. The person who refuses to explain themselves out of genuine indifference to others is not powerful. They are isolated. They are in many cases deeply wounded. Their silence is not sovereignty, it is a wall. And walls do not command respect. They create distance. What I am describing is something entirely different. It is the silence of someone who is so deeply connected to their own values, so thoroughly grounded in their own self-knowledge, so genuinely secure in their own sense of who they are, that they do not need external validation in order to feel real. They are not indifferent to people. They care deeply. They love deeply. They engage fully. But they do not need any particular person to see them in any particular way in order to maintain their equilibrium. They are complete. And that completeness, that genuine inner fullness, is what creates the gravitational quality I described at the beginning. It is what makes certain people feel solid in a world of people who are constantly shifting and adjusting and performing. It is what makes them trustworthy in a way that more communicative, more expressive, more explaining people rarely are. Because you trust what is consistent. You trust what does not change based on who is watching. You trust what is the same in private as it is in public. And the person who does not explain themselves is almost always more consistent than the person who does, because they are not adapting their presentation to each new audience. They are simply themselves, everywhere, always. And that consistency is the bedrock of genuine authority. Let me take you into the psychology of what happens when you stop explaining yourself, because the internal experience of this shift is remarkable and worth describing in detail. In the beginning, when you first start practicing this, when you first start catching the impulse to explain and choosing instead to let the silence stand, it is deeply uncomfortable. Your nervous system, which has been trained over years and possibly decades to manage your image through verbal explanation, interprets the silence as danger. It sends signals of anxiety. What will they think? What are they concluding right now? Do they understand? Are they judging? The urge to speak, to fill the silence with justification, to take back control of how you are being perceived, is almost overwhelming. And this discomfort is important. It is information. It is showing you exactly how dependent you have become on external validation. It is revealing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And the only way to close that gap is to sit with the discomfort, to let the anxiety rise and not act on it, to let the other person think whatever they think and discover, slowly and with genuine surprise, that you survive, that the world does not end when someone misunderstands you. That your sense of self does not collapse when someone draws the wrong conclusion. That you are, beneath the anxiety and the habit and the programming, more solid than you knew. And each time you survive it, each time you hold the silence and come through the other side intact, the ground beneath you becomes a little more solid. The anxiety becomes a little less urgent, the need a little less desperate, and gradually over time, something shifts at a fundamental level. You stop being afraid of being misunderstood, not because you have become indifferent to others, but because you have become more present to yourself. You have built a relationship with your own inner world that is rich enough, honest enough, stable enough, that it no longer needs to be constantly confirmed by external sources. And this is freedom, real freedom, the kind that the Stoics spent their lives pursuing and writing about and teaching. Not freedom from difficulty or conflict or misunderstanding, but freedom within it, the freedom to be exactly who you are, regardless of whether anyone around you understands or approves. Seneca wrote in one of his letters to Lucilius, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what deserves my fear." And this sentence, in its elegant simplicity, captures something profound about the psychology of the person who does not explain themselves. They have made a clear-eyed assessment of what actually threatens them and what does not. And they have concluded that other people's opinions, while not entirely irrelevant, do not constitute a genuine threat to anything that truly matters. Your reputation can be misunderstood, and you will survive. Your decisions can be questioned, and you will survive. Your character can be criticized, and you will survive. What you cannot survive, at least not with your integrity intact, is the slow erosion of your authentic self that comes from constantly shapeshifting your presentation to match what each new audience wants to see. What you cannot survive, not really, not in the way that makes life feel meaningful and true, is the gradual disconnection from your own inner voice that happens when you spend so much energy managing the voices of others that you can no longer clearly hear your own. This is the real danger. Not the misunderstanding, not the criticism, not the judgment, but the loss of yourself in the relentless pursuit of being understood by others. And Seneca is saying, know what deserves your fear, and this, the loss of your authentic self, deserves your fear far more than any opinion anyone could ever form of you. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal but philosophically perfect, about Socrates. He was once told that someone had been spreading terrible rumors about him throughout Athens, saying that he was corrupt, that he was a bad influence, that his teachings were dangerous. And the person who brought him this news expected Socrates to be upset, to respond, to want to defend himself or correct the record, or at least express some concern about his reputation. But Socrates reportedly said only this: "He must not know me very well," and moved on. This response, so brief, so complete, so utterly undefended, is one of the most powerful demonstrations of inner authority in the entire history of philosophy. Because what Socrates was communicating was not arrogance, it was not dismissiveness, it was something far deeper. It was the recognition that the rumors said nothing about him. They said everything about the person spreading them and nothing whatsoever about Socrates himself. His character was not determined by what someone said about it. His worth was not altered by whether someone understood it. He knew who he was. And that knowledge was so complete, so thoroughly his own, that no external narrative could displace it. He did not need to explain himself because his sense of self did not depend on anyone else's understanding of him. And this is the destination we are moving toward. Not the cold indifference of someone who has stopped caring, but the warm, grounded, unshakable security of someone who has stopped needing. Now let me speak about something that connects this philosophy to the practical reality of how power actually works in human relationships and human organizations. Because this is not just an abstract philosophical ideal. It has real, measurable, observable consequences in the way people treat you and the way you move through the world. When you explain yourself constantly, you are, whether you intend to or not, inviting negotiation. You are presenting your decisions and your character as things that are open to discussion, open to revision, open to the input of whoever happens to be listening. And people respond to this invitation. They engage with your justifications. They find holes in your reasoning. They counter your explanations with their own perspectives. And suddenly you are in a conversation you never intended to have, defending a position you never should have had to defend, to people whose opinion of your choices you should never have solicited in the first place. But when you do not explain yourself, when you simply act and let the action stand without commentary, you do not issue that invitation. There is nothing to negotiate with. There is nothing to argue against. There is only the action itself, clear and complete, and requiring nothing from the observer in order to exist. And this creates a very different dynamic. People do not know how to engage with silence. They do not know how to argue with someone who is not arguing. They do not know how to undermine someone who has not offered them a foothold. And so they do something unexpected. They adjust. They recalibrate. They begin, often without realizing it, to treat you with a level of respect that your explanations were never able to generate. Because your silence communicates something that your words never could. It communicates that you are not available for the negotiation, that your character is not a position paper open to amendment, that your decisions are made from a place of such clarity and conviction that they do not require the approval of others in order to stand. And people respond to this, deeply and instinctively and powerfully, because we are all at some level looking for something solid in a world of constant flux and negotiation. We are all at some level drawn to the person who seems to have found their ground, who is not shifting and adjusting and performing and managing, who is simply, consistently, unshakably themselves. And when we find that person, we do not negotiate with them. We respect them. Let me talk up what this looks like in the most difficult situations, because it is easy to not explain yourself when the stakes are low. It is easy to let a small misunderstanding pass without correction, when nothing important hangs in the balance. The real test comes in the high-stakes moments, when you have made a decision that people close to you disagree with, When you have taken a path that your family does not understand. When you have chosen something for your life that the people around you cannot see the logic of. In these moments, the pressure to explain yourself is enormous, and it comes not just from outside but from inside. From the part of you that loves these people and does not want to disappoint them. From the part of you that wants to be understood by the people who matter to you. From the part of you that wonders, in the quiet moments, whether their confusion means something. Whether their inability to see what you see should make you question what you see. This is the most important moment, and the most important thing you can do in it is to be very clear about the distinction between two very different questions. The first question is, am I making the right answer? This is a question worth asking. It deserves honest, rigorous self-examination. It deserves the input of people you trust and respect. It deserves time and reflection and genuine openness to being wrong. The second question is, can't I make everyone around me understand and accept my decision? This question is not worth asking, because the answer is almost always no, and the pursuit of yes will cost you more than the decision itself ever could. The truly powerful person asks the first question rigorously and honestly, and then, having answered it to the best of their ability, they act, without waiting for permission, without seeking consensus, without explaining their reasoning to people who have already decided they disagree. They move, quietly, deliberately, without announcement, and they let the results speak. Over time, across actions, through the accumulated evidence of a life lived from genuine conviction, the explanation that no words could ever provide begins to emerge. Not in any single conversation, but in the totality of a life. And that is an explanation that no one can argue with. There is something I want to say about the relationship between silence and self-knowledge, because I think this is the piece that most treatments of this topic miss entirely. The reason truly powerful people do not explain themselves is not strategic. It is not a calculated move designed to project authority or manipulate perceptions. At the deepest level, it is a consequence of genuine self-knowledge. When you truly know yourself, when you have done the hard, uncomfortable, honest work of examining your own motivations, your own values, your own patterns, your own wounds and strengths and contradictions, you arrive at a place where your sense of who you are is no longer primarily dependent on how others see you. Not because other people's perceptions are irrelevant, but because your own perception of yourself is so much more detailed, so much more accurate, so much more richly textured than anyone else's could ever be, that it naturally carries more weight. You know things about yourself that no one else can know. You have access to your own inner world in a way that is simply not available to any external observer. And when you live from that knowledge, when your actions flow from that deep self-understanding rather than from the desire to be perceived in a particular way, the need to explain yourself dissolves naturally. Not through effort, not through discipline, though discipline is part of the journey, but through the simple organic consequence of being more interested in who you actually are than in who people think you are. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every day in his meditations. He was not writing for an audience. He was writing for himself. He was engaging in the most rigorous and most honest self-examination that any person of his power and position in history has ever left a record of. And the consequence of that daily practice of self-knowledge was a man who did not need the Roman Empire to tell him who he was, who did not need the praise of his subjects or the agreement of his advisors or the understanding of his critics in order to maintain his sense of himself. He knew himself, and that knowledge was enough. I want to close with something that brings this entire conversation into a single, clear, actionable focus. Because everything we have discussed, the psychology of the need to explain, the philosophy of inner sovereignty, the practical dynamics of power and respect, all of it points toward a single practice. And that practice is this. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause, just for a moment, just long enough to ask the honest question. Is this explanation for them, or is it for me? Is this information they genuinely need, or is this anxiety I am trying to relieve by seeking their understanding? Is this communication that serves the relationship, or is this performance that serves my image? And if the honest answer is that it is for you, that it is anxiety-driven, that it is about managing how you are perceived, rather than genuinely connecting or informing, then try something radical. Try saying nothing. Try letting the action stand without commentary. Try trusting that who you are is visible not in what you say about yourself, but in what you do and how you live, and the quality of presence you bring to every interaction. It will be uncomfortable. The discomfort is the practice, and over time, through that practice, through the accumulated experience of surviving being misunderstood without being diminished, you will build something that no amount of clever explanation could ever construct. You will build the quiet, solid, unshakable authority of someone who knows exactly who they are and needs nothing from the world in order to know it. And that, more than any title or achievement or eloquent self-presentation, is what truly powerful people are made of. Not the loudness of their explanations, but the depth of their silence, and the life, the undeniable, unignorable, quietly devastating life that the silence allows them to build. If something in these words reached something in you, if there was a moment where you felt the truth of it land somewhere deeper than your mind, then this is your invitation to stay on this path. Subscribe to this channel because what we are building here together is not entertainment. It is a practice of becoming, and every conversation we have goes deeper than the last. I will see you in the next one.